Great. Hello, everyone, and good evening. This is a talk. This is the second installment of the November 2021 virtual events for the Alcuin Society. We are going to get underway just shortly. We're just admitting people in from the waiting room. Just to let you know, though, this is a virtual event for the Alcuin Society. So if that is what you're here to see, you're in the right place. Great. Well, I think we'll probably get underway now. Thanks everyone for joining us this evening. We've got some new names on the list in terms of attendees. So I thought I would take the opportunity just to let people know about what the Alcuin Society is. My name's Spencer Stewart. I'm the chair of the Alcuin Society, and it's an organization that was formed in 1965. And it's the only nonprofit organization in Canada that's dedicated to the entire range of interests relating to the books. So when we think about that, that's ephemera, book selling, book buying, typography, type design, paper making, really you name it. We're involved in a lot of different items. And we engage with them in a variety of different ways, one of which is through our journal, Amphora, as well as through virtual talks, such as the one that we're doing tonight with Markus Fahrner, and as well through the Alcuin Awards, which happen annually. And I don't know if people have had a chance, but we've just kind of announced the 2020-2021 intake. So we're very excited to be getting underway with the awards again. To mention a little bit about the Alcuin Society's awards, it's the only national competition of its kind that recognizes and celebrates the art of book design in Canada. And winners of the award represent the nation at a variety of different international exhibitions and competitions, including the Leipzig Book Fair and Book Awards in Germany. The Society also offers the Robert R. Reed Award and Medal to recognize lifetime achievement in the book arts in Canada. If you are not a member already of the Society, we encourage you to visit our site and consider becoming one today. There are a lot of benefits, including announcements about events such as this one that we're hosting, as well as the Amphora Journal and the subsequent catalog connected with the awards. And so this evening, we're delighted to have Markus Fahrner speaking about his various projects and his work. Just by way of kind of an introduction, I have a little bit of a piece put together of his story and his path. The first etching that Markus sold was at the age of 15 at the Frankfurt Book Fair. And it featured a library with overflowing bookshelves and a sleeping dog. And I believe that Markus actually has that print, that etching with him tonight, which is just great. Moving on from etchings and lithography, he eventually came to book design. And his foremost love is being the creation of small edition books, many of which he'll be discussing this evening. Markus's graphic design has carried him around the globe. And he's been in a whole variety of different contexts in which he's been communicating in that way for many years now. Whether it's inventive exhibition displays for a church organization in Frankfurt, Germany, or his panels at the Port Moody Station Museum, where he is also operates as a curator, all the way to working for creating ads and newspapers in Uganda, as well as creating packaging design for leading brands, a Vancouver-based beverage company. Most recently, Markus is working in the field of medical illustrations. Now, in the case of book design projects, Markus really takes a kind of hands-on, holistic approach to it. He writes, he illustrates, he often includes photographs he's taken, designs and prints the books, and in many cases, he binds his own books. Some of which are placed in institutions both in North America, such as the Library of Congress in Washington, DC, as well as in the UK through the Victoria and Albert Museum, as well as on the European continent. In addition to his book and graphic design work, as I mentioned earlier, Markus curates and spearheads exhibitions at the Port Moody Station Museum. Most recently, Inclusion, the subtitle of which is The Journey to Community. And it's an exhibition that details the history of people living with intellectual disabilities, and it will be on at the Port Moody Station Museum until June of 2022. So he'll be, I believe, speaking about it a little bit this evening as well. We're absolutely delighted to have Markus with us this evening to discuss his diverse approach to book design and graphic design. And with that, I hand it over to you, Markus, and I'll step back. We will have time at the end for conversation and some questions. So if you have any, please put them into the chat, and I'll be able to get them at that time. And yes, I hope you enjoy this conversation tonight. And Markus, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Well, thank you, Spencer. I was listening to you, and I'm thinking I could just now almost hang up and not talk to you guys because he delivered such a marvelous introduction. But of course, I will speak. Yeah, my name is Markus Fahrner. I've been now living here in Port Moody or in Canada for about 10 years. And I've been involved with Fauna&Fauna, which is basically the creation of my mother, like a press for many, many years. So the title of this talk, I think like I use that strange German word, is called Schaffen, which is kind of creation. And it's kind of, when you repeat it, it's a bit of becomes sort of almost a childlike kind of saying, like Schaffen. Schaffen is like kind of doing things kind of, meticulously, constantly working. And I think that sort of describes how we work quite well. Because it's sort of, I think it's an all-encompassing ongoing project. I mean, of course, we have different books, different projects, like as Spencer mentioned, in the museum or posters or something. But I feel, and I think like the more I sort of look back on it and kind of go through some of my own notebooks, I kind of feel there's sort of a thread going on through my life of kind of collecting information and then piecing it together and telling stories. So Fauna&Fauna Press is really about 30 years old that we've been working together, collaborating. There have been collaborations with other artists, but they're mainly sort of the core of Fauna&Fauna as well, my mom, and that's where it starts, kind of logically, with her. But it extends then to my wife Fitnat, who's and worked on some books together, and actually my two daughters, Alicia and Virginia May, who at times have been either voluntarily involved or forced child labor that I made them help me, maybe in the print shop. Don't tell anyone. I can really recall sort of from my earliest childhood that we were always surrounded by books. My parents would take me to bookshops, would take me to libraries. We would either buy a book or at least, spend a Sunday afternoon in a bookstore, just perusing books, reading various things, going to libraries, flea markets and looking for interesting pieces of books, little boxes filled with maybe pictures. Now that kind of sort of interest we have passed on to our children, traveling around. I mean, my wife and myself, when we would go to a new city somewhere, probably the first stop is somewhere in the library. I remember when we went to Toronto for the first time, and well, I think on the second day we hit the library and just explored, and the kids sitting somewhere on the floor grabbing some books. And yeah, that's been very, very important. And what is important is it's not just to be obviously a card carrying a library card in your thing, but it's the collection. And that's really sort of the collecting is the foundation of, I think, of our press and of our work. Barbara, Barbara Fahrner, that's my mother, she has created a series, and she said that's sort of her last big project. And it sounds really terrible, but it'll be like an ongoing thing. She works, there'll be books, there'll be paintings, there'll be drawings, and it's called das Muster, das verbindet. It's the sort of the pattern that connects it all. It's like, you know, like a spider's web that holds things together. And it's sort of the culmination of all her years of collecting things. And the idea behind this is, you know, like the world is so complex, that really just kind of, how do you express this complexity? Well, you just collect, and then you just create, and then you'll take, so these masses of index cards or notebooks that she has. And I'm actually going to share my screen now. I want to show you some of the, while I'm talking, mention some of the, so here are some of the notebooks. I mean, obviously, so these are my notebooks, but she has this, the idea is of collecting notes and creating out of those notebooks. She just kind of culls all sorts of stories. She collects quotes, ideas that come to her, observations, and then combines them in new ways and spontaneous ways by maybe selecting a few index cards and creating a new text out of it. And that sort of, at times, it is very surprising for the author herself. And this distilling of you know, the complexity of the observation into a book then obviously simplifies it, but also like represents the complexity of the world itself that she seeks to not explain. That's not the purpose of our books. You don't explain. We're not there to point a finger and say this is that, but just to sort of kind of, well, feature it. Now, if you were to put this into, or what she says, if she were to put this into, I'm gonna go back to some of the books, don't worry. If she were to put this into a regularly printed book, a nicely typeset book, she feels then you would, in a way, because now you have a perfect edition, you know, hundreds and hundreds of books that are all the same, you would kind of lose that aspect what she wants of the diversity, of the differences, of the spontaneity would be lost. So she frequently in these projects, especially for this the pattern that connects series, she on purpose works by hand. Now the text is always the same. However, as you can see on some of these images, they're handwritten. Their illustration, or like the drawings, they always change slightly. Now she tries to repeat them as much as she can, and of course after a while she has you know, like obviously has it down packed, that she can really replicate this. But the idea is also that this creates a variety, and in itself then presents the variety of information that's out there. I want to go back. So here's the thing. There's a notebook of a journey that I took on a motorbike through to West Africa. There's some drawings, some sketches that then either go nowhere, maybe filter into a book. Now, and that's really, really important. I mean, these notebooks, and I think so. My mom prefers to have index cards, hundreds and hundreds of index cards, boxes and boxes filled. I kind of like these little notebooks or something, and then they become sort of the foundation of our projects, where you return to these notebooks and you pull out various information. It seems to be some kind of a bit of a family I don't know. I don't want to call it sickness, but it seems to be a family kind of thing. These are the notebooks from my grandpa. I mean, this particular illustration there, it's probably done sort of 1919. There's some other drawings I'm not going to show you, but very bizarre drawings, and then sort of regular stuff where he's tried out to, sketches a church, sketches the mountains around it or something. So it seems to be something that has always been with us. Handwritten books, that's really sort of where Fauna and Fauna is. Picture of my mom with some of her like in her studio, and had a sort of a studio exhibition where she exhibits these books. She has been influenced by many things. I think one of the largest things is, so nature, mushrooms and nettles seem to have really played an important role for her. She created a book with John Cage, Nods, was published by Granary Books. And I think in that book, the both of them in discussion shared their love about mushrooms, and really it comes back to our idea of collections, right? Like mushrooms form these underground networks where miles long of like almost synapses, like what you have in your brain, which connects, in our idea, sort of different ideas and visions. These books, you'll find some of these books, as Spencer mentioned, Library of Congress has them, Stanford Victoria and Albert Museum, the Marimano Museum in Den Haag, Klingspoor Museum in Offenbach. That's sort of the idea. Now, let's move a little bit on and give you sort of a bit of a background. So my mom was, and I will talk about myself a little bit later. My mom was actually scheduled by her parents to be a nun. That didn't work out so well. Then they decided, okay, she should become a medical doctor. She started doing this, and that again really didn't go anywhere. But I think it sort of laid a foundation for her for that love of research, the love of detail, the attention to detail. She then studied under someone called Carl Kunz. This is a picture, excuse the little lamp there at the bottom. It's it actually hangs in my home here. Carl Kunz works in oil. This is a big picture of the Frankfurt train station. He was considered during the Third Reich as an artist, which is sort of the degenerated art. So he had to practice and keep these wonderful paintings in secret. Now, I remember her learning from him, working in oil. I remember, I don't remember, it's probably something that maybe they have told me, but I kind of feel that I remember sitting there and smelling the oils and seeing all these big frames with paintings sitting there as she drew. Then what happened is, so she was working in oil for a while, and then she got to know Walter Hanusch, and he works mainly in, as you can see, these wonderful objects here. And he does what was called sort of scrap works. There was a group of artists in Frankfurt, sort of, I don't know, very avant-garde, I'd say. And Walter, this guy there, you see him just welding. He was a master lithographist. So he did he had courses offering lithography. And so from the earliest age, I mean, they were like in the 1970s, they created something which is called Ersatzkunst, sort of a counter movement of art against sort of the more established art market. Now he then or my mom then started working with the big lithography stones. Again, I kind of grew up as a little lad there, sanding those stones down. It's very nice, very, very methodical you have to be, and it's like a little meditation. And then eventually, as I grew a little bit older and stronger, I was able to like drag them out and move them from where you sand them, grind them down to maybe the press, or put them back into the shelf. And then I think that sort of started her out on the idea that now you could combine maybe text and words, text, words, images, and then she started experimenting with books. Initially, she did maybe a big illustration on a lithography stone, printed this, maybe cut it out and sort of tipped it into a book. Then she experimented for a while with photocopied books. I haven't got one here, but here's an example of actually it is a photocopy, the black and white one on the side there. And she would try this, take her drawings, a stone that she had presented, and then maybe like, a smaller one, and then took it and photocopied and started making books. And as you can see, it is very crudely spiral bound. And then 1973, for the first time ever, I'm 8 years old. I aged myself now. So, but yeah, with 8 years, we heading out for the first Frankfurt Book Fair, and I'll come back to the Frankfurt Book Fair because it's really important. That's where where I literally grew up. Every year there was that yearly pilgrimage to these halls dedicated only to books. I mean, it was wonderful walking around there. It's what a magical world it was. And it's initially we were, if any of you have been to Frankfurt, you've probably seen these halls and halls of books and books. So initially we were stuck somewhere at the end of an aisle that was dedicated to religious books. So you had all those beautiful Bibles and religious texts. I don't know what possessed them to put sort of kind of often art that would maybe be very counter to some of the ideas that people in the religious section had there. But they would put us at the end there, and then eventually, I forgot when, but eventually there were enough book artists, and it had established itself, the sort of the idea of the livre d'artiste, to warrant giving us, these artist types, an entire aisle for ourselves. And it was now moved on away from the religious books. There was usually they had, I think, maps, children's books, and others there. And that's when I sort of kind of started really getting into it. And as Spencer mentioned, now this postcard, I think this is it. It's really not. It's really hard to see. I guess it has been colored in. You see a little guy there with his dog. There's another one that's probably hard to see, up on the shelf, trying to pull out some books. They fall down, and there's I don't know, very colonial looking fireplace and trees out there. Well, you can't see, there's sort of little gnomes and little things running around. So must have been something that was very interesting for me. And I made a lot of these things, and you see how tiny they are. So here is a little, like a blimp flying over a landscape. So these were my first little works, and I created them. And actually recently I got an email from a journalist who had bought them when I was very young at the book fair, and he said a set of about 5 or 10 of them been traveling around the world with him. And and wherever he made his home, they went up on the wall. And that was actually very nice, and it was really nice for me to hear about this. 82, I met a nice guy from England, and I started, I think, sort of a more of an interest in I don't know what you could say, professional book selling. And I don't know, maybe now, to my shame, I must admit, we were selling military books. I went over to England. I assisted him in selling some rare books, selling some of these military books. We went to foils, where I learned that he said, like, the lady who ran foils actually was a sort of a Nazi sympathizer in World War II, and she was utterly racist, but somehow she took a liking to my friend Calvin, who was a Black Caribbean gentleman, and with a, I don't know, a vast knowledge on books. And so I remember going into the back end of foils and walking up those aisles and offering our books there and filling the bookshelves. Something which was nice, because it kind of kept me sort of in, I was in the sort of English book scene as well. I want to show you a few more of my mother's books here before we move on. She likes these boxes. So often she works, that's, as we mentioned it earlier on, in these sets, right? So there's an idea, there are index cards that create these ideas, and then they form a book. But often the text is way too much. So in this case, there's 3 or 4 books, or so smaller books, of course, because most of our books are really unique books. This is actually a one of a kind, or a couple, there's 3 or 4 books, as I said, one of a kind, and they sit in a box. Sometimes they result in something like this. Now, we had a professional bookbinder help us with this project. Spencer mentioned that we bind our own books, but we do not have the ability, the knowledge of a professional bookbinder who can create something like this. I don't know. We wouldn't be able to do this. So, well, we always cooperate, and I think that's important, to share your skill and have cooperations and invite other tradesmen, in the sense of people who really know their trades, craftsmen who know how to do something like this. It's the same with the cage box. We had a box created for us, and then you sort of, that's what you can see sort of on the inside, these books, and you see there is this kind of, what we sort of, our own kind of Japanese step binding, sometimes in varying a bit more complex, but that's what we like, and what gives us the ability to be very, very creative. Now, what is really important in both of our works is, and what we like, is this kind of, you see the text shining through. So there is this ghost of the other pages coming through. So as you are leafing through the books, the images and the text change. They kind of form new images almost emerge as you turn the page, and you sort of kind of half uncover an image, or you half cover the text or something. The book is sort of a kind of in a constant flux. I'll go to that a little bit later. It's a slow process of creating our books. We have literally, we're hundreds and hundreds of pages of notebooks, and so books take a long time. I mean, sometimes I think, oh my gosh, I have not been creative enough, I have not produced enough. But I don't know, I think it's maybe I don't know, maybe it's my personal problem, or something of a creative, that you think like, oh, I should be producing more. I mean, actually physically producing a book, because it feels really, really nice when a book like this is then finally out there, and it's not just sitting in in your notebook or in your mind. And I think that's what always has driven us on, the physicality of the book, that you are able to, you print a book, you smell the ink, you have the physicality of binding a book, the paper. That is, I think, is as important as the text to us. Now, I think a book is really sort of a little transports, in a way, the world or a set of ideas around. So I think a book without any really text, just sort of a kind of acute visual, I don't know, arrangement, wouldn't be enough for us. I'm not saying that this is not, some of the books that are just images are absolutely great, but for us it's important to carry ideas and show and bring a text into it, and then have that manifestation of a physical book. The books are really important. As you can see, Mom was stranded in 9/11 in New York, visiting Steve Clay, our book dealer there, and she actually went down, I think, on that terrible day, and then seeing Steve off taking his kid to daycare or something, and then she saw the second plane going in, and then shortly after they saw, like these people covered in dust walking, just getting away from it. And sometimes they would offer them coffee or water or something, and people didn't even know where they were walking. I think just getting away, getting home. Now that's, as you see, it probably is hard to see, but it's a stranded traveler, and that's sort of about her time in New York. This book has been then bought by the Klingspor Museum, so I actually asked them to take a few pictures of it. It describes her being holed up in what they set up. They set up a sort of eventually they set up a corridor, and you couldn't get out. If you were not American, you wouldn't be able to leave. So Steve would have to go out and buy food and bring it back in. And then eventually, she was just kind of just dying to get away, and she couldn't because there was no planes flying. So that sort of details her experience there. So it's a very, very personal diary style book. I'm going to go a little bit faster because I am a talker. So we like to work with Leporello books. You see a little bit here. Now, moving on, the book fair has always been really, really important for us. I think like 1981. Now I'm kind of fast forward. I'm 16 now. We're setting up our stand as we usually did, the walls then nicely, and then the whole thing collapses. And the outcome is that all the books are flying around the floor. Mom has to be taken to hospital, collarbone is broken. And then I kind of fixed up the stand, and like kind of had some like brown wallpaper at the back. It's like almost, yeah, it was a brown wallpaper which we put up, and I arranged the books, and then eventually ran through the book fair. So so it's been a constant, and I've always been in this art world. When I was 1984, we purchased, together with the artist Susan Hostetler, we purchased a paper mill. And I mentioned earlier on Walter Harnisch and Volker Kutscher and Nicole Giraud. They were of that Frankfurt art group and sort of very avant-garde. They live had a art studio in one of the sort of last remaining farms in Frankfurt City. But it has now been kind of fallen apart and in disrepair. And then, of course, not of course, but artists moved in. And in the basement, we set up that paper mill and learned how to make paper, and had all these secret techniques where you dry them, put a plastic bag in and blow air in and dry them. And then the result of this was the C project. A huge project that went to the Gutenberg Museum in Mainz. Telling, I'm not going to go into it, but it's really, it was in a huge room, hanging panels representing sort of a seascape. And I think that's important. I mean, I was involved maybe in making the paper. I was too young, or probably too reckless with 19 to be really focused on something like this. But it was really interesting, and I liked the idea of the storytelling. And that's very important for my own work. As you see there, about turn March. When I went to England, I went to the OTC, that's Officers Training Corps. There's sort of the ROTC, the reserve officers or student bodies that are joining the army. Anyway, I went there, and then I kind of had this sort of rough look with sandpaper, and I made my little, it's hard to see, it's my beautiful little army picture book. And again, you have these thin pages shining through, and I talk about the experience that I had in the military, and some of the impressions that I took away from being in that kind of environment. It was, I guess it was important for me to experience this. Then we'll have a little bit here is Travelot and me, based on a little story that my daughter Alicia came up with. Is sort of kind of about, and some drawings that she made about sort of a parallel world between trains. You see us here like a little closer look on bookbinding. There's our sort of, yeah, the spine. You see a little bit more with I got a friend here who's really taught me a lot. Use a book, binding a book there, the spine there, and here's is a, I don't know, we were renovating an old house in Germany, and I was really overwhelmed with the mess and the work of the house, and then eventually I kind of fitted the entire house. Well, it's a small, tiny European house, right? So it's with hundreds and hundreds of sheets of stories, notebooks, actually turning the entire house into a big story, and kind of claiming the house, and maybe in a way taming that chaos that I felt was really overwhelming. So one of my latest books dedicated to James Baldwin, picking up some of his quotes, got some illustrations. I want to, let's see. So what is, it's really important to that I mentioned, I think Spencer mentioned that like I'm a graphic designer. So at one point, I'm sorry, I'm just jumbling and jumping back and forth. I think it's at one point I decided that, like the love of books and maybe making little etchings, I wanted to start taking this also, making it professionally, and maybe, making money in a different way, not just selling books, but, especially to support my family as well. So, what was logical to me was becoming a graphic designer. So I took my storytelling that I explored and that I shaped with making my books out into a more commercial environment. And Spencer hinted at it that I created a book for a German church organization, created panels, and again, it seems to be always coming to that idea that I sort of kind of collect stories and then form them into what happens now in a museum, into sort of a more didactic panels or more, but it's a story that is then kind of tamed in forms of books, posters, and panels. I want to briefly kind of backtrack a little bit. We created enough sort of in maybe 2001, we created something which was called the Second Encyclopedia from Cologne. It's based on a bogus story, Cologne Uber Tertius. And the idea is in that story, someone finds a long lost civilization and they have, of course, an encyclopedia. Now, my mom, Barbara, had an idea that we should discover a encyclopedia. And as you can see, there's a couple of folders with the alphabet in there. And in this, those folders, we have hundreds of individual little books, individual sheets, we have one, this is a book by my wife. It's called Mama Water, about water spirits and witchcraft in Ghana. Or in West Africa. She made, for example, like a little sachet with sort of magical words that's in there. I created a book, and I'm actually also sold this book individually later. And this is a bit of a secret. This is a book. It's called Le Musée. It's about a beautiful museum in Paris, and I've sold it as part of the encyclopedia, but I also like then in this case kind of used it again, the same text, and sold it individually in a slightly different format about this wonderful museum in Paris that actually led quite a few people to seek it out. But the whole thing is not there. It never existed. There are some pictures of the museum director as a young man. The young boy that you see there is actually my father as a little boy. The museum director sort of at a young age with the glasses on the other side is actually Derrida as a young man. And then I think that's a random old picture of a gentleman in England. So these are supposedly the same person, but it's not. And then you have pictures of the museum, and people really wanted to see this place. I actually wanted to see it, but it just doesn't exist. But it's nice storytelling. So back to these folders. So the idea was that that we didn't want to be sort of hemmed into a very static form of the book. Instead, we chose those folders, and it was a subscription. So we would send you out, send out a little book like this. Send out. This was not in the encyclopedia, but something similar. That's another recent work I did. We would send out like a little leporello like this, and with a little note saying, please file this. It's on architecture, it's on witchcraft, it's on something. Please file it under W, under A for architecture or something. But the idea was that the collector would then be able to here there's a book on again, spiral bound, that a collector would be able to file it as they see it fit. So if for some reason something on architecture reminds you on Frank Lloyd Wright or something, maybe you want to file it under W. That was the idea, that people can kind of create their own order, and we are not giving someone or the collector this order. On the other side, you see those lined paper. It's old wallpaper, and we printed with a laser printer on it, which was great because it really stinks of that glue, the rabbit glue, the animal glue. So you could just run one page through, and you had to wait for the printer. It's 80 degrees, you like kind of cool down, and then you put in the second thing. Otherwise you would literally kind of melt this thing off, and you had this hellish smell in the house. A little bit more, a couple of more pages of the book. So in 2014, I was actually lucky to buy, and some of you might recognize those folks here on the picture. There's Paul Rizal, myself, and my little daughter on an old Cold Armory letterpress that I bought from him, which actually used to belong to Jim Rimmer. which was really nice to get my hands on something like this, which sort of kind of made you, I don't know, being a museum guy made you part of history, made you lay your hands on. And then I worked with Yvonne for a while. We did some printing in his marvelous print shop. Here's my own little master printer who just outdoes me, and also her eyesight. That's my daughter when she was much younger, but you know, she can actually see those tiny letters, and with my glasses I'm suffering now. It's harder. I want to move to sort of some more commercial stuff because time is running out. So we come to Vancouver, and eventually I end up being in a oh, these pictures don't show up so well. I end up in a company called Leading Brands, and you might have had a sip of True Blue. You might have bought Pure Blue Unwine in Costco. And I was in the lucky situation that for a long time, I could just sit there and I could draw berries, baby blue, I could pomegranate. And what a pleasure this is as a graphic designer or as a creative person to spend days and days drawing berries. I mean, I love this. And then these were printed on shrink labels. So then, of course, you have to think about a berry that is suddenly contorted on a plastic thing. So it actually, like, you know, like you design it first, and then anyway, it has to be stretched out to be eventually shrunk back and still look like a berry. So that was kind of fun and an expertise that it's great to have that, and it's a fun experiment. And I always return to books. Darren McCloskey, like a local author, I've done some letterpress, printed some of his poems on letterpress, but I did some books for him. I did this one here. Oops, it is Garden of the Gulf, which is really nice. It was really important for him to have the sort of kind of, you know, like the sort of onomatopoeia. You have these kind of zip, click, clack. He wanted to have that expressed in the text, and I really like working with authors like this and kind of, I don't know, make their ideas come to life. I worked with a guy called Philip Bear, and he is learning to love is sort of a self-help empowering guide, and he wanted something really different. So I came up with a series of sort of mixed artwork, drawings, part collages, and set this book, which was great storytelling. And then sort of kind of the museum kind of comes up. I've done a lot of work for Paul Coquitlam. You would have, for a couple of years ago, you would have seen most of the banners in the city, and the transformer boxes were either wrapped by me or like the posters on the streets were by me. And then the museum, they asked me to do their POCO stories, stories of local events, local important people, sports, and then I came up with the idea that they're just sort of kind of hanging, because we've done that frequently in our artwork, hanging from the ceiling so that you can just meander through this exhibition and then read about different people, different events. Eventually, I ended up this is now 4 years ago, I end up in the Port Moody Station Museum, as Spencer mentioned. We have strangely enough, we have a World War I trench there, because I won't go into much detail, but some people from Port Moody, 88 to be precise, went and fought in the Great War. So with the centennials, we built this trench, and I felt like, yeah, it's important to tell these stories, and we get in uniform and we go through the trench and talk about it. But I wanted to see, like, illustrate the war also, like just by, you know, like sometimes when you change your way of looking at something, and there is you might have heard of Rudolf Koch. He's a great German typographer who happened to be in the Great War, and he did a lot of drawings. He actually did drawings. If you look at that poster there, sort of in gray, there's sort of what appears to be like a little entrance to a hut that is actually looking out at Vimy Ridge. Now, obviously looking at the opposite side from what the Canadian forces but they're all not really concerned with war as such. They're more of a domestic quality. And I thought it was nice because it kind of sheds a different viewpoint on the war. So actually, I kind of I contacted the Klingspor Museum and was arranged eventually that for his drawings to come to Canada. For the first time ever did they leave Germany. For the first time ever did they actually leave the museum. And we had, I think, 66 drawings in there. So, and here you have like the guy with the top hat and the umbrella, strangely enough, says that he's a spy, dressed up as a spy. Okay, so and then you have these guys pondering, I guess, what they're going to eat. Here we have as he saw it, and I had to sneak a picture in of my dog. And it was nice because it helped, like it allowed me to talk about, like, obviously Rudolf Koch, his time as a soldier, but also his life as a typographer. Talk about typography. You can't see in the showcases on top. I have my California case in there. I have a few sort of letters in there a little bit. So because people don't know what letterpress printing is. So we had that in there as well. And we talked about his type. I was really, really fortunate. I managed to get Andrew Hoyam from the Aryan Press from San Francisco to invited him up here for a talk. He has one of the largest Koch collections outside of Germany. And then on the way back, when the staff had to travel back to Germany, which I'm not going to go into, which was really terribly difficult to organize, we managed to get the curator from Germany to come and give us another talk. We're sort of really running out of time, but I was like the visual storytelling is so crucial for me in the museum. So we'll see something of the trench posters that I do for the trench. Then I came up with the idea that we should do a film, and I approached the local high school, and then you see the poster that I created for their movie. Actually won an award with the CBC. There's the journalist, and she reported on those young folks making the movie. Then I use every opportunity that I have. And here you have the picture with the table, and we talk about art in the Great War. As a graphic designer, I can't keep away from like creating graphic things. So I created I copied what a war diary would look like. I created a little catalog for our trench. Really fun project, making 1914 gem jars and McConaughey stew and oxtail, ox tongue tins, replicating them what it would have looked like. That was a fun graphic design project. Visual art, of course, we display that in City Center. And then I came out with the suitcase project, another way of telling a story. I went again to a local high school and had a couple of high schoolers imagine what an imaginary immigrant would bring to this country. A fascinating, really fascinating project. I'm not going to talk about this, but it was great storytelling, great way of doing this. Here's a few things myself and some work that I've done in the museum panels. Really important, the Black Porters, totally written out of history, ignored, working often 48 hours, shunned by the unions, fought a hard fight to eventually in the early 50s to be recognized by the unions eventually and had some slightly better conditions. Leading to my last project, this is in inclusion. It is, Spencer mentioned about people living with disabilities and their way from I almost say incarceration, freedom to leaving institutions, and some of these things you can see the cookware is from different institutions where they had been forced to live. Do you see language matters? And it tells the story of leaving institutions and living with us in society. This is fantastic. This is James. He was taken as a child to Woodlands in New West, and then eventually they tore New Woodlands down, a brutal institution, and he did this oil painting. And I think, well, he has the last laugh because the institution is gone, and he's now living freely and creating wonderful pieces of art. There is an institutionalized gown, a little bit more about Moody's history, transformer boxes I've done. Talking about the world in flame, it's at the back of the museum. The cost of the Great War, not financial, but in terms of human suffering. I'm just going to rush through because we're really running out of time. Some of my sort of posters that I created. Just wanted to say this is sort of my mother's work. And then I've worked on that one recently. And Spencer quickly mentioned, I'm not going to bore you with this, medical illustrations. So we're talking about muscles, animation have done. That's my beautiful daughter, got to sneak her in. I created a logo for their student union. And that's pretty much it. And I think I should really stop and give you the chance to have some questions, maybe.
Markus, thank you so much. I'm gonna pop up here. We do have some questions, and if anyone has any that come to mind, taking in all these different approaches and thoughts, please put them in the chat, and we'll get to them. One that popped up is it's a question about another creative person here. I'm curious if you know the work of Ruth Laxon, a book artist from Atlanta who had much the same aesthetic as you have in some of the projects that you've done.
I don't. I mean, no, but I'm very curious to know her. Yeah, or look at her stuff. Yeah, no, I don't. Sorry.
I have a question just regarding the work that you've done with your mom over the years. Starting out, you were working very closely. You were living in the same city, and she was working on kind of artist books and these sorts of projects. What has it been like working at a distance?
Well, much harder, because I think like for a while we actually lived in the same building. So literally we would have, my mom is a big fan of Blake. I love Blake too. And we would have almost sort of a kind of Blake-like sessions where the family would sit together and we would all bind books, and I forced my daughters to maybe, illustrate or like color in a certain section. And so now with the distance, that makes a huge, it's very difficult, because now, and obviously she's not so tech savvy. So it's more like we discuss things and then sort of more, hey, I have this idea, we could express it that way or something. But right now it's very hard to have actually a physical, like cooperation. A couple of times I went back. Sometimes when she comes here, we can maybe work on it, and it's much easier. The distance has really kind of caused it's harder. It's way harder, because it's really now about sharing ideas rather than actually physical cooperation.
Right. To that point, there's a question in the chat here of can you tell us about some of your future projects? What are some ideas on the table at the moment?
Yeah. So one of the I have this big tome here. It's already bound. It's pretty much empty. There is a few pages that are already in, and it has to be, the book is about myself finding my position in this society. I've done a lot about decolonization, someone who knows me will know that my daughters are mixed. So the last year was very heavy on us with Black Lives Matter. And I do think as a white male, I need to position myself because, you know, we are the ones that were always excluding people. We were the ones that are kind of relegating people to the sidelines. So I think this is a book about myself finding, you know, where I'm standing in this world, you know, and standing in the sense of hopefully not excluding others, not sidelining someone. So it'll be about, I found a picture from my grandma from 18 something, 1840 or something. And she looks exactly like my daughter. And it was uncanny. And I think it's something like this where where I want to work in sort of my very, very personal history. So the book will be handwritten to some extent, or I will tip in, I will glue in, you know, like an illustration, photography. That's sort of my next big project. Now I have no idea when that will be finished, but that's I'm really looking forward to working on that one.
Mm. Something I've noticed in the work that you've done with your mom, but also your own projects, and even with the project of the suitcases, there seems to be a real interest with how the miniature can open up into a whole world. You know, that your books seem to have so many different pieces of media coming together, held in one place, but really they're kind of restless in some way. They kind of always allude to something else.
Yeah, I think
Where do you think that interest comes from to sort of put it all on the table like that?
uh, I, well, I think it's this kind of this idea, I mean, of that, as I mentioned earlier, that complexity of the world. And I think I almost feel that there's sort of a restlessness inside me, you know, like I feel there's so much going on, and everything is so interesting. And I think it's really nice to bring this in. I mean, you know, like we started out almost with this, right? With a little, and I think this is it. This is it. I want to create books that are little libraries in and itself that contain the world, but I'm not going to tell you what to look for, and I'm not going to tell you what to think. But there's books or items that you can pull out of these different. And I find that in my own life, I've done, you know, like you've seen, I've done quite a bit. You know, I went to Africa. I worked a little bit on an AIDS brochure there. I did some advertisement there. When I was in England, I kind of created a little book like this about a guy journeying down the Niger. There's so many facets, and I want to just bring them in. And I think this is, yeah, just kind of collecting it and holding it down.
We have two questions that have come in. One of which is, can you tell us about the influences on your choices of typeface?
I think that changes quite a bit. I mean, like I do a lot of work I've done a lot of for the Legion, for the BC Yukon Command. Every year I create a book filled with stories and articles or something. Now for that one, I'm using Jim Rimmer's Albertan Pro because I really wanted a Canadian typeface, right? It's a lot about obviously Canadian issues. So I wanted something that was created here by a local. I kind of like Bauer Bodoni. I really can't say, you know, what makes me, I feel there's a certain projects cry out for certain typefaces. And I think I'll leave it at that because it's really hard. I'll probably spend another hour describing why that is. But there are certain, I mean, of course, there's clearly something like, you know, when I do some of the World War I stuff that I've created for the trench, well, obviously you have to pick a typeface that was in use back then, right? You're not gonna take Helvetica and stick it on a World War I poster or something. Mm-hmm. But there are certain projects that I feel that speak to me where I think that makes sense. Like, as I said, in those Legion books, I really wanted a Canadian typeface. And that's what happened there.
We have another question that's come in here. You've traveled a lot, and what you do, let's just see here. What do you feel is different about being a designer and book artist in Canada versus Europe? How has moving influenced your style?
Well, I think obviously I matured as as I get older. I think like what happened here, I think I have become, I was way more in Germany, I was more involved in a, like in a sort of very kind of artsy scene or something. And I think I have left that a little bit behind. And I've kind of I think I kind of matured and kind of in my more commercial work, whereas I think there was a certain, a little bit more, being more free in Germany, because I think I was surrounded by, and that's not not necessarily, like something that's happened, could have never happened in Canada. It's just happened to be in the scene that I was in Germany, like, from the earliest age, my mom made me, or these artists made me sit under a table and recite poetry, because there wasn't an iPhone yet with a speaker. So they used a little, I don't know, 10-year-old boy to read something which he didn't understand, right? So there was that scene that was there. So I think I was a little bit more freer. And now I think I follow more like, certain design, directions or something. So that has changed a little bit, yeah, influenced me.
What are some works at the moment that are influencing you? What are some other book designers or other works that you have an eye on?
To have an eye on, what is that? I mean, right recently I kind of, I don't know, like I rediscovered Emery Douglas. I think he's I don't know if any of you heard of him. He's a designer for the Black Panthers, and I really enjoyed his sort of kind of, I don't know, rough and ready kind of drawings. He did, I think, the Black Panther magazine or something. I really enjoyed his Saul Bass is something that came up recently. So I go through these phases. Jan Tischold I liked for a while, and then I'm really into him, and then I kind of abandon this, and then I move on. But that's sort of like Emery, I think, is sort of right now, because I want to go back to sort of illustrating a bit more, and that speaks to me at the moment.
And that work too, it translates so well into stencil and things like that too. It's such bold designs.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And that will be, I think that'll be a nice inroad for this big book here that's asking to be filled. So right. Bold stencils, bold lines or something that will come in there.
Fantastic. Well, Markus, thank you so much for taking the time. As I mentioned from the beginning of the event, we have this recorded, so people on the call, if there's someone you think that might be interested in this, it will be available in the next probably about a week from now. We will be having another installment in December, and that will be December 9th, 5 p.m. Pacific, and it'll be Dr. Eric Kwakkel. The title of his talk will be Cheap Books Before Print. And so that is already set up on our Eventbrite page. You can also follow the link through our website and our various social media platforms. And we invite you to that. Registration is open. But for now, I would like to take the opportunity to thank Markus for the presentation and all the various approaches. We look forward for upcoming projects and work from you. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope this was not too rambling. Thank you.
It's fantastic. Thanks.
You. All right,
everyone.
Bye-bye.